Hey guys, Pastor Tanner here. I apologize for starting a full hour late. My computer decided it absolutely had to do an update or it wouldn't allow me to stream. I could not get my XSplit to work at all. And so I had to do an update and it took about an hour. So I apologize for that. That was not the goal. That was not the intention. But I'm here now. And excited to get going. Hope you've had a good week thus far. I know I have. Hey there, Rafe. Sorry I've started up a little late, brother. My computer needed to do an update or XSplit wouldn't work at all, so I literally tried to put it off and not stream and not update and just stream, but it would not let me do it. So I had to go for a full hour-long update before it would finally let me go. Hey, James is here. James on Twitch says, I recently read Doubting Thomas's story. That's an interesting one, James. I think it's good. James says your audio cut out. Did you skip once or did it cut out permanently? Can you hear me at all? Oh, got you. I mean, we can hear you, it's just that at the time I heard you speak, it wasn't good. Oh, I'm sorry to hear that. Yeah, I was just saying that was a good story. The whole Doubting Thomas situation is a very good one. Something wrong with the audio. Okay, I'm going to talk for a little bit, and then I'm going to try to listen to the audio separate and see what's going on. Let me pause the music and try to just go to audio. That sounds really good to me. I wonder if my mic needs to be turned up. Let me just turn my mic up. Oh, my mic is like maxed, man. You sure the audio's wrong? Audio test, audio test. Can anyone hear me? James, try to reload. It looked like the audio sounded good on my end. Let me check my settings. Yeah, the settings look good. I'm getting good feedback, so I'm not sure what it is. Anyone else getting audio problems? Maybe I can sit a little closer to the mic. Hello, check 1 2, check 1 2, test, just testing the audio, check 1 2, check 1 2, hello, hello. Hello, check 1 2, check 1 2, test, just testing the audio, check 1 2, check 1 2, hello, hello. Yeah, I can hear that, guys. It's like, I don't know, it's like cutting out at weird times. I'm gonna try to unplug my mic and plug it back in. Okay, I'm testing now. I'm just going to talk continuously to try and hear it and hear what it says and hear what it sounds like. Testing. Hello, 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 hello. Okay, I'm testing now. I'm just going to talk continuously to try and hear it and hear what it says and what it sounds like. Testing. Man, I don't think that fixed it. What do you guys think? Does it sound bad? Rick says it's a little better. Jesse says audio on Facebook and YouTube below in register. I'm not sure how to fix it. I'm gonna make an adjustment. This is not how this is supposed to be done, but I'm gonna make an adjustment. I'm gonna add a new audio capture. To be honest, guys, not sure how to fix this one. Not sure how to fix it. I'm gonna go with Ray says, if only I could have that level of deepness for my podcast. I don't know why it's that bad. I'm gonna reboot it. I'm gonna reset the stream. And then try it again. Stick around, guys. I'm just resetting the stream, trying again. See if I can't get...
The classic means to fix something, turn it off and turn it back on again. Is it working now? Does it sound better? Can everyone hear me? Hello, hello, hello. Testing check 1 2 1 2. Testing check 1 2 1 2. Hello, hello, hello. Can you guys hear me? James says yes, it's so much better. Alright, good to hear. That was weird. Rafe says, wow, cool, yeah. Okay, good. Glad to hear it, guys. Thank you. Thanks for the feedback, and thanks for helping me fix it. What can you do, huh? Who knows? Again, the classic means of fixing something, turn it off and turn it back on again. And there you go. So, thank you guys for that feedback. I'm glad it's working now. Alright, I think my intro's good. I don't know if it's good, but it gets to the point. Now I'm gonna be going into question number 1. Are you willing to give up your life for Christ? Let's read the text and find the verses where this is pointed out. Although I did want to dig into this a little bit more. Again, looking at Luke 9:24. Just trying to find some historical background. Rafe on YouTube says, you know, at the moment, teaching the Bible is my greatest joy, but also my biggest headache. I feel you on that one, Rafe. It's like a never-ending cycle every week for me. I got to put together a Bible study lesson. I got to put together a sermon. And I know some pastors are doing even more than that. But I've got to do that every single week. I never get a break. I always have to be on point when it comes to that stuff. And yet, when I'm doing it, when I'm participating in it, when I'm seeing people's eyes opened, when I'm hearing good feedback and I'm hearing that people's lives are changed by it, it's so encouraging. And so I hear you exactly. I know what you're saying about it. It's your greatest joy, but also your biggest headache. It's tough, brother. It's tough. And it takes a lot of time and dedication and energy. Okay, I think I got a good intro. Got a little background there. Now let's go and try to develop our point number 1, which talks about John kind of setting the example for us in terms of dying for Christ. Rafe says, you know, I've been doing it for a while. I want to just get to the point where it becomes a habit and not something I struggle at. You know, that's a double-edged sword, Rafe, because I agree with you that you want to get to the point where it's a habit, not something you struggle at. But when you get into habits, like I'm to the point where I can prepare a sermon without actively thinking about my structure or the way I'm going about preparing it or something like that. But if you get to the point where it's too much of a habit, you begin to stop asking challenging questions, and you kind of get in this habit of preparing it the same way that you always do, and I think that is in a way that doesn't actually help people or promote growth. And so you just got to be careful if you push it too far. So for example, like Rafe says that I've gotten to that point, and I think I have, but like there's certain aspects of the process that I almost skip every time now, just because it so rarely becomes helpful that I just skip those aspects. And the fact of the matter is that I need to continually be on point and not skip those aspects of sermon prep, so that the times that they do come up and the times that they would be helpful, I'm still doing them, rather than just falling into what's easy. So yeah, Rafe, it's a good point, but you just got to be a little careful of that. Rafe says, I guess what I mean is I want to get to a point where I understand how to put things together without feeling like a dummy. I've got you. Okay. Yeah, and some of that comes with time. It's a problem because you have the process of building the sermon, but then you have the process of preaching the sermon as well. And those two inform each other. You build the sermon and then you preach it, and then when you actually preach it, things don't always go the way you thought they would, and so that changes how you build it. And then as you build it, you start thinking about how you're going to preach it, and that changes the way you preach it, right? And so they inform each other, and to me, I hate to say it, but practice makes perfect. The more you build sermons, the more you preach sermons, the more these two things are going to inform each other and help you to produce good sermons consistently. So, but yeah, I hear what you're saying. Let's see, verse 14, verse 16. Verse 14, verse 16, verse 24. (14, 16, 24, 27 to 29). All those verses are relevant to this point. Now, what aspects can we bring out about dying for Christ? Man, this is such a sick story. If you really think about it. Ugh. Give me the head of John the Baptist on a platter? What grotesque sin. Verses 17 and 18 are why he got himself in this mess. He spoke out against the sin in his culture. This is why it happened to him. Still don't know how relevant that is yet, but... maybe the first point is that John the Baptist is committed to the point of death. Because... Rafe says, I thought about using a binder to preach from. How would you do that, Rafe? In what way? What would the different pages be? How would it work? Curious. Rafe says I would put my notes in a binder. Okay, so you would just have your notes laid out and you'd just be able to flip them like pages in a book? I don't think like that would be too bad. I think that would probably work just fine. You could lay it open if the pulpit's wide enough to hold it. One thing I find sometimes is the pulpit's not wide enough to take your Bible and, say, a binder. And so one stack of papers is usually good, and you can just flip them. But if your pulpit's wide enough, you could probably put a full binder on there and just flip through. That would probably work fine. And then you could have all your sermons together in one place, too. That's probably a good idea, Rafe. Rafe says, I hope we will see. That's right. A lot of it's trial and error. Just trying to figure it out as you go. Rafe says I will have my iPad as a backup just in case. Yeah, I think that's a good idea. Or you could start with the iPad and have the binder as a backup just in case. Having a redundant system like that, regardless of which end it's on, I think can be good. Lillian Bailey, I hope I got that right. Lillian Bailey on Twitch says, hi, hello, how are you doing today? Lillian Bailey asks, I'm just wondering, how long does it take you to prep for one sermon? Well, since I started streaming, it takes a little bit longer. I would say if I wasn't streaming and interacting with people, it probably takes me 5 to 6 hours to prep a sermon on average. But since I started streaming, it takes me more like 8 to 10 to prep one on average. I am currently on my 5th to 6th prep hour, and this is where I'm at. When I'm finished, Lillian, it will look like this. Here was last week's sermon. And this one took me, I want to say, 9 hours to make. Maybe 8. So that's the last week's, and again, here's where I'm at this week thus far. So, yeah, somewhere in that range. Again, without streaming and interacting with people, 4 to 6 hours, but with streaming and interacting, which I love to do, by the way. I'm kind of ADD, so it's fun to work on it, intently for 5 to 10 minutes and then talk to people, and then work on it intently and talk to people. So, with that process, it takes me more like 8 to 10, but it's more enjoyable for me. Good question. Thanks for asking. So I kind of got this chain right now that talks about, would you be willing to go to the point of death? But now I want to ask the question, why? Why did John the Baptist end up in this predicament? Or maybe how? That will be question number 2. Liliane says, dang, I didn't know it took so long. I feel bad for not paying attention in church. That's awesome. Oh man, I haven't laughed that hard in a while. Oh man, holy smokes. Oh man. Oh man. That's just me, Liliane. I can't promise that everybody takes that long to do it. That's just how long it takes me to do it. Okay. That's funny. Oh man, you made my day. That's good stuff. So maybe your pastor only takes an hour. I don't know. Or maybe he takes 20 hours. Beats me. One of the things, I actually think I'm relatively fast at sermon prep compared to others. And I think one of the reasons is because I just do outlines, if you will. I do these mind maps, which are essentially glorified outlines. But some people manuscript out their entire sermon beginning to end. They write the whole thing like you'd write a paper. And if you're going to preach a 30-minute sermon, that can be like 6 to 9 pages written out, word for word. So I cut down on my prep time a lot by virtue of the fact that I just mind map or outline it rather than manuscripting the entire thing. Spoke out against sin in his culture. Rafe on YouTube, Liliane. I'm on YouTube as well. Rafe is also preparing sermons over there, and he says hi. Yeah, it sucks. So there you go, Liliane. There's some more feedback. Rafe loves preaching and he loves doing those things, but he hates the preparation process. So we work together to help each other on that. Liliane says, my pastor is a woman. I just feel like the sermon isn't going anywhere when I'm listening. Like, I don't know what to take away from it, but she is very nice. Yeah, Liliane, I don't know your context, and I'm not trying to be overly critical or anything like that, so take whatever I say with a grain of salt. But what I would say is that I believe that churches live or die by their pulpit. I believe that what is happening in the sermon is essential to a strong church. I believe good sermons need to be preached week in, week out, that are challenging and desire and move you and motivate you to want to worship Christ more and to want to follow him with your life. I believe that's what a sermon is meant to do. And if you leave thinking, oh, she's very nice, but you don't leave thinking, man, my Jesus is amazing and I want to worship him with all of my life, and if you don't leave thinking that, I would encourage you to maybe look for a church where that's the case, where you're getting preaching like that, where the word is captivating your heart and your mind. I believe churches live or die by their preaching. Lillian, if you check out... Oh, I'm saying Yan, but it's Lily Ann. It's Lily Ann. Wow, I feel dumb now. Lily, if you check out down further on Twitch, you can see a little placard I have there where it says sermons, and you can listen to my sermons. Click on that, and you can hear some of my sermons. And that is the type of preaching that I feel like... I'm not saying everyone has to copy me exactly. I have my own style. But preaching that challenges you, preaching that motivates your heart and encourages you to worship. That's what I hope everybody would find in their pulpit when they went to church. Bloodbound on Twitch. Yo, just dropping in. Good to see you, Bloodbound. Good to see you, brother. Hope you're having a good Friday. I know I am. It's been a good Friday thus far. Only getting better. This might be a shorter sermon this week. I feel like the points are already kind of coming together. Bloodbound says, a lot of college homework with a bunch of sad faces. Yeah, that's brutal, brother. I remember those days. Having to cram with all that homework. Feeling like there's no end in sight. It was brutal. Brutal. Bloodbound says, I'm also doing some trading on the side here on finance. I'm guessing that's finance. Margin trading to be exact, but I think I got a glitch and I'm scared I'm getting interest taken out of my account. Ooh, that's scary. I don't know anything about that, Bloodbound. Best of luck. But I don't know anything about that sort of stuff. I just got my 401k that I just drop a little bit in every month, and I hope that's going to work out for me. I don't know if that's the wisest thing to do, but that's what I do. Not sure how I'm going to put all this together, but I'm getting some ideas, and you need to go in here. Ooh, I'm getting a bunch of stuff. Okay, hold on. First, Lillian says, what are your thoughts on reading the Old Testament? I feel like it can get very boring. Any advice on how to fix this? Very good question, Lily. I think the key to unlocking the Old Testament is understanding biblical theology. Now, do I have a good introductory material for biblical theology? I love the Old Testament, but my love for the Old Testament only opened up when I started to understand biblical theology. There's a way that both the Testaments are knit together to tell a large overarching story. This isn't bad. I remember this one by Michael Lawrence. Let me see this. This is more like preaching, though. Yeah, this is too academic for what you're looking for. What about biblical theology? Let me think for a moment. Probably Michael Goheen. I think it's called Story of the Bible. I have a course from him on it. You know, books like this, Goheen does really, really good work on understanding the big picture of the Bible, and that will make the Old Testament come alive for you. Let me see if I can find something on Amazon for you. Do I have this book? Goheen Bartholomew. True Story, Whole World. I don't have this one. Lily, check this. Michael Goheen. I love Michael Goheen's stuff, and this one's got 13 customer reviews. Doesn't look like it's too long. The True Story of the Whole World, Finding Your Place in the Biblical Drama. Books like this, I think, are helpful, and I would encourage the works by Goheen as a good place to start. I had to read Goheen on missions, I believe it was. Yeah, Introducing Christian Mission Today. But he gives a good big picture overview of the entirety of the scriptures that makes the Old Testament come to life. There's another Pathway Learning. And if you don't mind investing a little bit more money, I took this course on Pathway Learning. If you go to Pathway Learning, just type it into Google. I took a course in here on Christian missions. And there are a lot ones here. But Christian missions, I think, is also a key to opening up the Old Testament, because there's a grand narrative and a grand story that goes through the whole thing. And so once you begin to understand the Old Testament and how it all is united, I think it makes the Old Testament come to life, and it's no longer boring in the way that you're describing. So that's what I would recommend, Lily. Check out the resources of Goheen, the Drama of Scripture, these types of resources. Check these out. And then maybe check out Pathway Learning and try to get some teaching on that topic from there. Very good question. Let's see. I also had a follow-up. Bloodbound says, yeah, I'm going to try to drive somewhere today because I'm waiting for online responses, which when I apply, and they're too slow, so I'm just going to appear somewhere in person for a job. I need the monies. Yeah, that's a good option, Bloodbound. The other thing, I know some people have recommended to me, they like driving for Lyft or Uber, and you can get money pretty quick that way if you need to. Wouldn't suggest it for like a long-term thing, but if on short term you're in need of cash, I've heard those are decent options. Rafe on YouTube says, I will try to end Titus 1:9 with a quote from Calvin. The pastor ought to have two voices, one for gathering the sheep, one for warding off and driving away wolves and thieves. The scripture supplies him with the means of doing both, for he who is already deeply skilled in it will be able to both govern those who are teachable and refute the enemies of the truth. I think that's a good quote, Rafe. And quotes can be very, very helpful for people. They have a way of putting things that are challenging to people and that they kind of help us and direct us in how we should go. And so I like using quotes a lot, and that sounds like a good one that would go well with your sermon from what I know of your sermon. Bloodbound says, at Lillian, I mean, sure, there is something out there that's less boring, but it's important to identify that they are saying the same thing in the same way. Yeah, there is some continuity between the Old Testament and the New Testament. I think it's important to recognize that. Rafe says, not sure yet. Lillian says, thank you. I'm having a really hard time reading it right now, to be honest. Yeah, no problem, Lily. I would recommend some of those resources. Let me see if I can't go through some of this with you. So, like, for example, here's Goheen. This is a course I have from Logos. The Story of the Bible, Biblical Interpretation 101. Or no, 201. It's a 201 class. But this one is interesting because it starts with Jesus and it talks about the big picture. And then it starts going into the Old Testament. And it talks about Genesis 1. The importance of Genesis 1 in the Bible story. Like, listen to this. Let's all listen to this together. And I can show you what I mean. Importance of Genesis 1 in the Bible story. I'm going to have to adjust my settings so you guys can hear the audio. Probably something in this range is good. And let's just listen to what Goheen has to say on this topic.
In the last session, we talked about the way Genesis 1 is rich in doctrine. I'd perhaps prefer better it's rich as it unfolds in worldview, telling us who God is, the world's like, and what humanity's like. But we also noted that it doesn't do it through propositions. It doesn't do it through analytical structured teaching, but rather it does it through story, through a certain kind of literary structure. In fact, Genesis 1 is a beautiful literary structure. And so it would be good to just take a moment to look at that structure and how Moses takes time to paint the backdrop of the biblical story. Genesis 1 has two stages. Stage 1 is Genesis 1 verses 1 and 2. And then stage 2 runs from Genesis 1 verse 3 to Genesis 2 verse 3. In Genesis 1, in stage 1, in the first two verses, it begins with, in the beginning God created the heavens and the earth. And then it tells us what the earth was like in verse 2. It describes it in three ways. It was dark, it was without form, it was formless, and it was empty. Now those three words have to be held together because the second stage of Genesis 1 is going to be to make the dark light, to give form to the formless earth, and to fill the empty creation. Keeping these words together are important. Perhaps a humorous little story will help you remember why these are important. It happened one time when my youngest daughter was about 2 years old or 3 years old, and she had been listening to us teach on Genesis 1. And the way I used to teach it with my kids was start by saying, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth. Then I would ask one, what was it like? And they'd say it was dark. The other would say, no shape. And then the third one was empty. And as she was a 2-year-old or so sitting at the table, was sitting at her high chair, and she pushed her bowl across to my wife to get something put in it, and my wife says, oh, it's empty. And immediately she came back with dark, no shape. You see, she understood that those 3 words belonged together. The world was dark, it had no shape, and it was empty. And in stage 2, we begin to see that on day 1, the darkness is banished by the light, by the creation of light. In days 2 and 3, though without shape, the formlessness is removed as the creation is made up of 3 compartments: sky, dry land, and seas. We see in days 4 through 6 that the emptiness is remedied by the creation of creatures to inhabit and dwell these 3 areas or spheres of the creation. And we see that it's all accomplished by the commands of God as he speaks and says, let there be. And we see that also there is an assessment all the way through, and it was good, and it was good. And then finally, humanity is created as the climax, and then we hear that it is very good. So perhaps we can look at the structure in this way. We see that first of all, on day 1, the first command is given and light is created. Then on day 2, the second command is given and the water is separated to create the sky. On day 3, that waters below is separated to make the seas and the dry land. And then the land is given vegetation. And so now the darkness is gone, the emptiness is gone, the no form, the formlessness is gone, and the earth has been formed. But then on the last 3 days, God begins to fill the earth. In his first command, he creates the sun, the moon, and the stars. And incidentally, it's very interesting to note that the sun god Re, was the primary god of the Egyptian pantheon. And he basically says that this sun, it's not a god, it's no more than a servant that is given to rule the day. But he creates the sun and the moon and the stars on day 4. On day 5, the birds and the fish to inhabit the sky and the seas. And then the animals on day 6 to inhabit the land. And so now he has formed the earth, he has filled it, the light, the formlessness, and the emptiness is gone. And then we've reached the climactic moment where humankind is created in God's image, to be a steward over this creation and to develop it evermore, revealing God's glory. And then God rests. The creation is completed, and we hear that this creation is very good.
So some of the themes I want you to pick up in that, Lillian, are the following. First, the Old Testament speaks to us, but it speaks to us in a different way than the New Testament does. It speaks to us in story, narrative, rather than didactic teaching. The New Testament is nice because it's straightforward. It tells us, do this, don't do that, do this, don't do that, right? There's a lot of didactic teaching in the New Testament, and that is helpful and easy in terms of us understanding how we should follow it and how we should structure our lives after it. But it is the Old Testament who teaches us in story and in narrative. And in that sense, it can be more difficult because it's harder to parse those truths, but it can also be more interesting because there is more to it in terms of the actual content. It's like a narrative, it's like a story, it's like reading a good fiction book. There are some interesting aspects to it, and you can kind of follow it that way, right? And so that's one thing I would encourage you in, is from reading the Old Testament, try to get that direction and that guidance from the narrative that it points forward. The other thing I want you to see is the big picture of what he's talking about. He talks about the fact that mankind is created as a steward over creation, and mankind is meant to rule over the earth. This actually informs what we are to do going forward, even clear into the New Testament. And so those theological underpinnings are essential to help us and guide us into the future. And so those are two things I would encourage you with. Again, if you can find some good materials on biblical theology, maybe biblical theology from a more accessible point of view, not from such a academic point of view, I think that would really encourage you because you begin to see the big picture. Whenever I read the Old Testament now, I'm always seeing the big picture of what's happening, and it's because of my understanding of biblical theology that I've been able to arrive at that conclusion. So those are two things I would encourage you with, Lillian. Bloodbound says, to be fair, the Bible is the only book I should be determined and excited to read. To be honest, coming from a believer background, I hate reading. Like, you don't understand, I hate books, but I can't talk smack about the Bible because it's crucial and so important, and the effect it will have on me when I act on its message. Yeah, good point, Bloodbound. And that's exactly the idea. And the Old Testament is 2/3 of your Bible, and so I think it's encouraging to read the Old Testament and to understand it. Rafe on YouTube says, the image of God informs us of this stewardship. Exactly. We're created in the image of God, and what it means to be made in the image of God is to be made as a steward. That is what it means to be made in God's image. And so to be made as a steward is to rule over his creation. And again, all of this informs the Old Testament, what the Old Testament means, why we should follow it, all those types of things. So I hope that was helpful, Lily, and I would encourage you to try to find some biblical theology resources because they open up the big picture of all of Scripture. Good question. Oh, I didn't know where you click it is essential for tying them in. That's helpful. I just figured that out. You learn something new every day. Man, I'm digging this music today. This is right my speed right here. We lost someone. Did we lose Lily or did we lose James? Not sure who we lost, but we lost somebody on Twitch. Okay. So point number one, I'm going to ask the hard question. Are you willing to give up your life for Christ? I'm going to point out that the narrative is directed around this idea that John was willing to be put to death. And then I'm going to put us in a scenario where that might be the case today, and would we be willing? The next thing I want to ask is, how did John end up in this predicament, right? And I want to essentially ask ourselves, he ends up in this predicament because he's calling out sin in the culture, and particularly the sin of powerful people who have authority over him. And we don't have the right to be like, man, John should have just kept his head low, right? This is a biblical example of prophets, what they're supposed to do. And Jesus is prophet, priest, and king, and we are Jesus' representatives, and so that's something we need to do in the culture as well. Would we be willing to speak out against sin in our culture? Christianity is not about taking the safe route in life, but I want to temper this, and I want to be careful, because Christianity is also not about being rude and controversial for its own sake. I know some Christians who, in the name of being a prophet, treat sinners very negatively, and then they have a martyr complex when people call them out, and they feel justified in their own stance. And that's not the case. So I want to temper this, but I want us to be willing to say we would call out sin in our culture even if it leads us to the point of death. So that's all of point number one. And then what I want to say then is, this takes me to my next big question. The reason John got put in his predicament is because he spoke out. Not only are you willing to give up your life for Christ, but the next question I want to ask people is, are you willing to live your life for Christ? And in some ways this is much harder, right? Dying for Christ is a one-time event, and I do not want to denigrate at all those who have died for Christ. But living for Christ day in, day out can be much more difficult. And then I'm going to give some examples of people who, living day in, day out, live for Christ. And I want to challenge all of us to do the same. Bloodbound says, oof, when I ask myself that question, I just get a sad realization. Yeah, define giving up your life for Christ and living for Christ. Giving up your life for Christ is like you're standing up for the truth. They're going to put you to death. This happened with a lot of early martyrs, right? And they are willing to go to death, burned on the cross, burned at the stake, hung on a cross, all those things. They're willing to do all those things for Christ. But that's a one-time event. Living for Christ is day in, day out drudgery, reading your Bible every day, even when you don't feel like it, praying for your loved ones, praying that God would change the hearts of people. Living for Christ is day in, day out evangelizing the lost and seeking to share the gospel with them, even when you don't feel like it. That's what living for Christ looks like. And it's a lot harder because it takes repeated dedication, long-term commitment, rather than a one-time event. Rafe says, next year, in the hopes of improving my preaching, I plan to attend a Steve Lawson expository preaching workshop. Rafe, I'm attending that workshop in September. I'm going to that exact same workshop, but I'm going to it in September. Expository preaching workshop, Lawson. I've already signed up for it. This is, for those who don't know, this is what Rafe is talking about. And I'm going to... So this one's in Oklahoma, Chicago, Tennessee, Washington. So these were earlier in the year. Right here's the one I'm going to. Denver, September 9th to 11th. This is the one I'm going to. That's awesome, Rafe. Good to hear it, brother. I'll let you know if there's aspects about that I think are really, really good. But yeah, I'm going to this one here in Denver, September 9th to 11th. That's really cool that you're going to end up going to the same one. Or not the same one, but to the same conference. It looks like it'll be very helpful. Rafe says, yeah, he has already been to Texas, so I'm going to have to wait. Got you, brother. Got you. Where are you at in Texas, Rafe? I'm flying out to Texas next week. I'm going to be in I'm going to fly out to Dallas, and then we're probably going to take a road trip to Austin. Just for pleasure. Go out there to take a little bit of a break. I didn't know you were in Texas, brother. Bloodbound says discipline, basically. Yeah, exactly. In fact, I'm glad you said that. Discipline. This is what I want to encourage us to do as Christians, is to discipline ourselves for the sake of Christ. Yeah, good point. Rafe says, I'm Central Texas. I'm from Schulenburg, 4 hours from Dallas, 1 hour from Austin. Bloodbound says, hey, I helped with the sermon, GG. That's right, Bloodbound, right here. I'm gonna preach this. I'm gonna speak to it. And I may or may not give you credit, and so I apologize for that in advance. That's awesome. Rafe, let me know if you want to meet up. If you don't, I completely understand. But I might be around that area, out that direction, and let me know if you'd like to catch up or meet up at all. That'd be cool. Because we are doing a road trip. That's the whole point, right? It's not like we're going to one part of Texas and just chilling there. We're gonna fly into Dallas, and then we're gonna head to Austin, and then we're just gonna kind of keep driving around the state and checking out really cool stuff for, you know, a week or so, just to enjoy Labor Day. I don't know the day, Rafe. I'll let you know as things get closer. I know I fly out on Sunday, and I don't think we're starting the road trip until Wednesday. Let's see. I fly out Sunday. We're probably starting to drive around on the 28th, 29th. So I'm thinking maybe 30th, 31st, or 1st, somewhere in there. I don't know for sure. We don't have set plans. We're just kind of doing a road trip and gonna hang out. I'll nail down the plans early next week, and then I can let you know them. I'll be nailing the plans down around the 26th and 27th, and then I can let you know what we plan on doing. Bloodbound about my plagiarism says, it's fine, God should get the credit. He created me, and he knows everything I was going to learn anyway for me to even suggest that, so there's no point in putting my pride in the way. Good attitude, Bloodbound. That's great. Thanks for justifying my plagiarism. Appreciate that. Rafe says, message me on Facebook and let me know. Awesome. I will, brother. Let me copy that down. Okay, I think I just sent you a message. Man, I'm digging this music today. This is nice stuff. Okay, and so I want to talk about people who are willing to live their life for Christ, people who were committed. So the first I can think of is Mr. Genor, and you always gotta listen to Mr. Genor. And we'll all watch this one together, guys, because Mr. Genor is classic. Super encouraging testimony. Yeah, it's going to be here. So I'm going to pause music again. I'm going to bump up the audio that you guys hear from my system. And we're going to watch Mr. Genor together. Because I'm definitely going to have to reference this.
a number of years ago in a Baptist church in Crystal
Wow,
Palace,
that's quiet.
in London. The Sunday morning
Oh,
service
it might be
was
okay
closing,
for you
and a
guys. Is that
stranger
loud enough?
stood up at the back, raised his hand, he said, "Excuse me, Pastor, can I share a little testimony?" The pastor looked at his watch, he said, "You got 3 minutes." And this man proceeded. He said, "I just moved into this area. I used to live in another part of London. I came from Sydney in Australia. And just a few months back, I was visiting some relatives, and I was walking down George Street. You know where George Street is in Sydney? It runs from the business hub out to the rocks, the colonial area. And he said, a strange little white-haired man stepped out of a shop doorway, put a pamphlet in my hand, and he said, "Excuse me, sir, are you saved? If you die tonight, are you going to heaven?" He said, I was astounded by those words. Nobody had ever told me that. I thanked him courteously, and all the way on British Airlines back to Heathrow, this puzzled me. I called a friend who lived in this new area where I'm living now, and thank God he was a Christian. He led me to Christ, and I'm a Christian, and I want to fellowship here. And Baptists love testimonies like it. Everyone applauded and welcomed him into the fellowship. That Baptist pastor flew to Adelaide in Australia the next week, and 10 days later, in the middle of a 3-day series in a Baptist church in Adelaide, a woman came to him for counseling, and he wanted to establish where she stood with Christ. And she said, I used to live in Sydney, and just a couple of months back I was visiting friends in Sydney, doing some last-minute shopping down George Street, and a strange little white-haired man, elderly man, stepped out of a shop doorway, offered me a pamphlet, said, "Excuse me, ma'am, are you saved? If you die tonight, are you going to heaven?" She said, I was disturbed by those words. When I got back to Adelaide, I knew this Baptist church was on the next block from me, and I sought out the pastor, and he led me to Christ. So, sir, I'm telling you that I am a Christian. Now, this London pastor was now very puzzled. Twice, within a fortnight, he'd heard the same testimony. He then flew to preach in the Mount Pleasant Baptist Church in Perth. And when his teaching series was over, this...
Rafe asks, what are we watching? Rafe, can you hear it okay? Is the audio coming through? What we're watching here is this is a story about Mr. Genor, and it's always been an encouragement to me. And my second point is going to be about living for Christ. And I think Mr. Genor is a perfect example of somebody who lives for Christ. And so we're watching a story about him on YouTube. Just let me know if you can hear it okay. I hope the audio is coming through. It's a little low, but I can hear it. It says Bloodbound. Okay. Let me turn it up to max. Okay, that's as much as I can get it to for you guys.
Senior elder of that church took him out for a meal. And he said, "Mate, how did you get saved?" He said, "I grew up in this church from the age of 15 through Boys Brigade. Never made a commitment to Jesus, just hopped on the bandwagon like everybody else. And because of my business ability, grew up to a place of influence. I was on a business outing in Sydney just 3 years ago, and an obnoxious, spiteful little man stepped out of a shop doorway, offered me a religious pamphlet, cheap junk, and accosted me with a question. "Excuse me, sir, are you saved? If you die tonight, are you going to heaven?" He said, I tried to tell him I was a Baptist elder. He wouldn't listen to me. He said, I was seething with anger all the way home on Qantas to Perth. He said, I told my pastor thinking he would sympathize with me, and my pastor agreed. He had been disturbed for years, knowing that I didn't have a relationship with Jesus, and he was right. And my pastor led me to Jesus just 3 years ago. Now, this London preacher flew back to the UK and was speaking at the Keswick Convention in the Lake District. And he threw in these 3 testimonies. At the close of his teaching session, 4 elderly pastors came up and said, we got saved between 25 and 35 years ago, respectively, through that little man on George Street giving us a tract and asking us that question. He then flew the following week to a similar Keswick Convention in the Caribbean, to missionaries. And he shared the testimonies. At the close of his teaching session, 3 missionaries came up and said, we got saved between 15 and 25 years ago, respectively, through that little man's testimony and asking us that same question on George Street in Sydney. Coming back to London, he stopped outside Atlanta, Georgia, to speak at a naval chaplains convention. And when his 3 days of revving these naval chaplains up, over 1,000 of them, in soul winning, the chaplain general took him out for a meal. And he said, how did you become a Christian? He said, well, it was miraculous. I was a rating on a United States battleship, and I lived a reprobate life. We were doing exercises in the South Pacific and we docked in Sydney Harbour for replenishments. We hit King's Cross with a vengeance. I got blind drunk. I got on the wrong bus, got off in George Street, and as I got off the bus, I thought it was a ghost. This elderly white-haired man jumped in front of me, pushed a pamphlet in my hand and said, "Sailor, are you saved? If you die tonight, you're going to heaven." He said, the fear of God hit me immediately. I was shocked sober and ran back to the battleship, sought out the chaplain. The chaplain led me to Christ. And I soon began to prepare for the ministry under his guidance. And here I am in charge of over 1,000 chaplains, and we're bent on soul winning today. That London preacher, 6 months later, flew to do a convention for 5,000 Indian missionaries in a remote corner of northeastern India. And at the end, the Indian missionary in charge, a humble little man, took him home to his humble little home for a simple meal. And he said, "How did you, as a Hindu, come to Christ?" He said, "I was in a very privileged position. I worked for the Indian diplomatic mission, and I traveled the world, and I am so glad for the forgiveness of Christ and his blood covering my sin, because I'd be very embarrassed if people found out what I got into." He said, "One bout of diplomatic service took me to Sydney, and I was doing some last-minute shopping laden with parcels of toys and clothing for my children, walking down George Street, and this courteous little white-haired man stepped out in front of me, offered me a pamphlet, and said, 'Excuse me, sir, are you saved? If you die tonight, you're going to heaven.' He said, I thanked him very much, but this disturbed me. I got back to my town, I sought out the Hindu priest, and he couldn't help me. But he gave me some advice. He said, just to satisfy your curious mind, nothing else, go and talk to the missionary in the mission house at the end of the road. And that was fatal advice. He said, because that day the missionary led me to Christ. I quit Hinduism immediately and then began to study for the ministry. I left the diplomatic service, and here I am, by God's grace, in charge of all these missionaries, and we are winning hundreds of thousands of people to Christ. Well, 8 months later, that Crystal Palace Baptist pastor was ministering in Sydney, in Gymea, southern suburb of Sydney. And he said to the Baptist minister, "Do you know a little man, an elderly little man who witnesses and hands out tracts on George Street?" And he said, "I do. His name is Mr. Genor, Genor, but I don't think he does it anymore. He's too frail and elderly." The man said, "I want to meet him." 2 nights later, they went around to this little apartment, knocked on the door, and this tiny, frail little man opened the door. He sat them down, made them some tea, and he was so frail he was slopping tea into the saucer as he shook. And as he sat with them, this London preacher told him all these accounts over the previous 3 years. This little man sat with tears running down his cheeks. He said, "My story goes like this." He said, "I was a rating on an Australian warship, and I lived a reprobate life, and in a crisis, I really hit the wall, and one of my colleagues, whom I gave literal hell, was there to help me. He led me to Jesus, and the change in my life was night to day in 24 hours, and I was so grateful to God. I promised God that I would share Jesus in a simple witness with at least 10 people a day, as God gave me strength. Sometimes I was ill, I couldn't do it, but I made up for it for other times. I wasn't paranoid about it, but I have done this for over 40 years, and in my retirement years, the best place was on George Street. There were hundreds of people. I got lots of rejections, but a lot of people courteously took the tracts. And he said, in 40 years of doing this, I've never heard of one single person coming to Jesus until today. Do you know, I would say that has to be commitment. That has to be just sheer gratitude and love for Jesus to do that, not hearing of any results. Margarita did a little count. That's 146,100 people that simple little non-charismatic Baptist man influenced somehow to Jesus. And I believe what God was showing that Baptist minister was the tip of the tip of the tip of the tip of this iceberg. Goodness knows how many more had been arrested for Christ and were doing huge jobs out in the mission field. Mr. Genor died 2 weeks later. And can you imagine the reward he went home to in heaven? I doubt if his face would ever have appeared on Charisma magazine. I doubt if there would ever have been a write-up with a photograph in Billy Graham's Decision magazine, as beautiful as those magazines are. Nobody except a little group of Baptists in southern Sydney knew about Mr. Ginnell, but I'll tell you, his name was famous in heaven. Heaven knew Mr. Ginnell, and you can imagine the welcome and the red carpet and the fanfare he went home to when he arrived in glory.
Oh, the feels. Hit you with all the feels. So I got to do something similar, I think, on Sunday to illustrate living for Christ. Oh, the feels. Got the tears going. It's rough. It's rough. I'm glad you guys can't see my tears. But talking about living for Christ, commitment to Christ, following Christ with all your life, I think I got to bring up that story of Mr. Ganor. And I don't think I'll be able to tell it as good as that guy does. But I think I got to bring that story up because it is very, very encouraging. So I'm going to write that down right now, Mr. Ganor. Bloodbound says, wow, commitment, LOL. And Rafe says, wow, cool. Yeah, I really like that story about Mr. Ganor. I heard that a long time ago. It's been out for years, and it was very, very encouraging to me when I heard it. Bloodbound says, yeah, his English and quick accent and words make everything sound better, with a smile face. Exactly. I'm not going to be able to do it justice, Bloodbound. But I think I can do it well enough to give people some feels as well. It's too good of a story. It's too good of a story. And so Mr. Ganor, I think, is a good example of commitment. The question is, should I bring up other biblical examples? Or should I stick with that one? Give me 1 second, guys. Sorry, I had to blow my nose because it hit me too much in the feels. Crying over here. Hold on, I got a text message. Jesse says, you've already told the Ganor example in a previous sermon with a winky face. I know, but I'm going to tell it again, and I'm going to tell it in more depth, okay? Golly. No, that's good. That's helpful. So, we'll go with Mr. Ganor. So, but that is a good point. What it means is I need to say it again, but use it as one of many examples because I can't keep running back to the same one. So, what could another example like Mr. Ganor be? Let's look up. I think I can get something out of. Let's see. John Stott's Gathered Gold. And let's try commitment, see if commitment is in here. Maybe zeal? Bloodbound says, to make you feel better, this isn't a lie. I think I've cried at least 2 times on your stream. Oh, thank you, Bloodbound. I appreciate that. That's good. That is good. Bloodbound says, but I just didn't say anything, obviously. Yep. Unfortunately, I was sitting here right with the camera in my face, so I had to own up to what was going down. That's funny. This is where it would be better if I knew, if I'd read more Christian biographies and if I knew my church history a little better, because I know there are several Christians, great men of the faith in the past, who have exemplified exactly the point I'm talking about in terms of living your life for Christ. Oh, I need to put the music back on. Let's make sure I don't blow you guys out. Yeah, the audio level is good. I'm going to blow myself out, though. Okay, there we go. Yeah, these quotes are decent, but Let me see if I've got, I bet I can find, like, I have books like 50 Christians Everyone Should Know or something like that. "131 Christians Everyone Should Know." This is a good one. I'm sure some of these people's lives are full of zeal and just not giving up. Ooh, I know, David Brainerd. Is Brainerd in here? I know how to find out easily. Brainerd is not in here. Oh, come on. There we go. Edwards has written about Brainerd. And I'm sure Edwards will speak to his zeal. You know, I don't have time to read this whole thing, though. I'm sure it's, you know, there's going to be good quotes in there and everything, but I need something like a fact book to help me narrow some of this down. Jess says, I've got Brainerd upstairs. Yeah, I've got him in Logos as well. I just want, this is what I need, like an encyclopedia where people can, where there are summaries of certain people, so I can get some ideas of people of the past. Yeah, this is what I need, are like dictionaries of great men of the faith from the past. So this is too short. Brainerd served as a Presbyterian missionary during the Great Awakening in America. He is best known for his remarkable journal of his evangelistic mission to the Native Americans in Middle Colonies of 1745. Orphaned at the age of 14, he nevertheless was able to matriculate at Yale University, but was dismissed before graduation for an offhanded remark that a certain tutor had more grace than a chair. Had no more grace than a chair. Ouch! You could get expelled for that. Oh, how times have changed. The Presbyterians licensed him to preach. He was later ordained, and he ministered to the Native Americans under the auspices of the Society of Promoting Christian Knowledge, SPCK. Hey, that exists to this day. The revivalist Jonathan Edwards, who was the father of Brainerd's fiancée, published the journal after Brainerd's untimely death. Wow, that's cool. So I need, not necessarily Brainerd, but I need like an encyclopedia like this that talks about well, none of these are them. Type encyclopedia. And then title Christian. Let's try that. Theology, the church, theology, Dictionary of Christian Biography, Literature, Sects, and Doctrines. That might be interesting. Set that off to the side. Keep scrolling through. Antiquities, Ancient Christianity, Christianity in America, Christian Education, Beliefs, Spirituality, let's check what I just opened. Dictionary of Christian Biography. First of all, you gotta look at the copyright on stuff like this. 1877. Not encouraging. There might still be some good stuff in it, but so, like, I doubt Brainerd would be in here, for example. Search a big name. Yeah, see, it's kind of too old a document. So you're going to get real early. Are these biblical? Let's check Anselm. See, no Anselm. Let's check Calvin. There is Calvin. Yeah, this isn't the sort of thing I'm looking for. Maybe it is just this. I'm just going to search this entire thing for commitment, see if somebody was committed. See, these are the sorts of things that I think are helpful for people. Augustine's conversion sent shockwaves through his life. He resigned his professorship, dashed off a note to Ambrose telling of his conversion, and retreated with friends and mother to a country villa in that place that I can't pronounce. There he continued discussing philosophy, churning out books in Neoplatonist vein. After half a year, he returned to Milan to be baptized by Ambrose. By the time he reached his own home, he had lost his mother, his son, and one of his closest friends. These losses propelled Augustine into a deeper, more vigorous commitment. He and friends established a lay ascetic community to spend time in prayer and the study of the scriptures. It's intellectual. Intellectual. No. No. Maybe zealous is the word I'm looking for. Yeah, I'm almost through the full book. Here we go. Origin. In 202, when his father Leonidas was beheaded for his Christian beliefs, Origen wanted to die as a martyr too, but his mother prevented him from even leaving the house by hiding his clothes. To support his family, the 18-year-old Origen opened a grammar school, copied texts, and instructed catechumens. See, this is a perfect example because this is what I'm contrasting. Origen is a perfect example. So we got Mr. Genner, we've got Origen. Because Origen's father was martyred. And this is what I'm talking... See, I'm shifting gears here. Origen wanted to be martyred as well. If daddy's going to die for the faith, so am I. Leonidas. But his mother prevented him, and then he ends up being a major church figure down through history, right? And I think it's a really good point, too, because who here has heard of Leonidas? Probably nobody. Well, if you've watched 300, I suppose. But that's not the same Leonidas. Nobody has heard of Leonidas, Origen's dad. But a lot of people who have heard of Origen. And it's the difference between dying for Christ versus living for Christ. Origen lived for Christ. Huss is a good point as well. Rafe says LOL. Don't laugh at me, Rafe. Not that Leonidas. Okay, so instead of looking for commitment, let's look for zealous. Interesting. Boniface. Interesting. Phoebe Palmer. Menno Simons. Perfect example. Right here. This is exactly what I'm talking about. Fanny Crosby. While she enjoyed her poetry, she zealously memorized the Bible, memorizing 5 chapters a week. As a child, she could recite the Pentateuch, the Gospels, Proverbs, and Song of Solomon, and many Psalms, chapter and verse. Boom. Fanny Crosby. I'll go second with her. So we'll go Mr. Ganor, we'll go Fanny Crosby. Maybe we won't go Mr. Ganor since Jess is criticizing me using him twice. Might be a bad idea. And I'm probably going to include this quote, so... Fanny Crosby. We'll see on that. Now, where should discipline go? Should discipline go later? Discipline should go later. Now, here's another question. Is this related enough to the text? Because I've got a structure here, but it's not as tied to the text, which might be bad. Jesse says, using Fanny Crosby would plug the value of scripture / Awana starting kids out young. Yeah, I think that's a good point. Yeah, in fact. That needs to be mentioned during that. Guys, we write better sermons when we all work together. I appreciate that. So let's look at the text. Oh, I hit the Kindle button. Never hit the Kindle button. What's it doing? No, don't do it. Don't do it. So I got Mr. Ganor, Fanny Crosby, Origin, etc. Bloodbound says, that annoying we're all in this together High School Musical song is popping in my head because of what you said. Nightbot threatens Bloodbound. Stop spamming emotes. You got a warning. Nightbot. Nightbot is funny. And that's also funny, Bloodbound. So now the question is, see, I got a lot of cool ideas here. Where are these going to go in? If I'm taking this as my structure. Bloodbound says LOL4 emotes, come on. That's right. Evidently Nightbot's limit is 3 emotes, because if you go to 4, he's gonna give you a warning. Yeah, I got lots of good ideas here. Ooh. Debauchery, the sensual dancing, the beheading. I can bring that up here when we're talking about calling out the culture. So I don't know where this will go, so I'm going to throw this here for now. Debauchery, sensual dancing. Call out the culture like John. That's part of living for Christ. That's what got John killed. So at least I got that in there. I think these other ones might be able to come in on point number 3. Because point number 3 is, what do we learn about Christ from this account? And so I might be able to pull in some of these ideas into point number 3. Two ungodly reactions to God's conviction are his word. Herod and Herodias both have ungodly reactions. I might expand this then. Herod, Herodias, two ungodly responses to conviction. It's hard when you cover such a large pericope. I've got, what is it? 16 verses or something like that. It's very, very hard to zoom in on certain things, but maybe I can just pick out ideas that are present in the text. Ooh. This is a good one. Herod enticed by something more physical than material. I can apply that to us personally. This will go into discipline. Herod enticed by the more sensual and physical than the spiritual. This is going to be a good application. And it's tied to the text. Herod gets enticed. Herod likes listening to John, but he likes Salome's dance more. And because he likes Salome's dance more, he ends up making a terrible, terrible decision, right? So too, in the context of talking about discipline for Christ, we may like Christ, but let us never like, say, video games more than we like Christ, because it will also lead us to make terrible, terrible decisions. And you can fill in the blank with not video games, but whatever, right? Herod enticed by more by the sensual and physical than the spiritual. Let us not be enticed. We need to order our lives correctly. And this will go in the live for Christ type of thing. Because Herod had the opportunity to live for Christ, and he chose against it. So I'm going to contrast verse 20 with verse 22. Bloodbound says, well, I mean, it's written, right? Put God above everything else. You like stuffing your face with chocolate ice cream? Great, here you go. But slide me that Bible real quick. Bloodbound. I love it. But I also love chocolate ice cream. So, you know, we don't want to get legalistic about it to where all you should ever think about is the Bible. All you should ever worry about is the things of God. But the fact of the matter is that should be the thing that preoccupies the majority of our mind, our heart, our time, etc. We don't want to get legalistic about it, but we have to, in a sense, put our money where our mouth is and do what we know is the right thing to do. So, I like that, Bloodbound. And I like chocolate ice cream. So that ties that one to the text. Let us not be enticed like Herod was. He traded lower pleasures. He traded higher pleasures for lower pleasures. We ought to do the opposite. And another negative aspect is worrying about your image. That's something that Herod is worried about his image. That's part of why he puts John the Baptist to death. I'm going to use a new tool because I don't know what to do with these yet. These go together, but I don't know what to do with them yet. I want to remember that. Movie rituals. No. Herod is worried about his reputation. We ought not to be. Boom. Okay. All right, guys. Some good ideas developing. We're going to button this up next time. I'm gone up to time. I know I started a little bit late because of the updates on my computer, but we've made some good progress. I've really enjoyed interacting with you guys. And I need to get me some lunch, and I need to prep the rest of the day for this evening. And I will ideally see you guys tomorrow. Any final questions for me before I sign out, guys? Rafe says, peace. Peace, brother. Appreciate it. And like I said, once I get into Texas, I'll start planning things out a little more closely, and I will let you know our schedule. Bloodbound says, peace, bro. Thank you, guys. Hope you have a great rest of your Friday, and maybe I can interact with some of you guys tomorrow. Have a good weekend, and may the Lord bless you as we head towards the Lord's Day, and we can worship and glorify and honor Him. Thank you, guys, for all you've done today and all of your help today, and take it easy. Talk to you later. Bye now.